What's up, everybody, and welcome into the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Show, coming to you live from the NBA Draft Combine in Chicago. I am at Wintrust Arena right now, which is where DePaul plays their home games, and behind me, you see the court where players have been battling it out for their spot in the NBA Draft for the better part of the last 5 days now. Here's how things started. The G League Showcase, that tipped off on Saturday, and essentially what that is that's more or less the camp before the camp. That's where players, draft hopefuls, come, they get their measurements done, they play, all for a chance to qualify for the NBA Draft Combine. That started on Monday. But before that, on Sunday night, we had the NBA Draft Lottery. Obviously, the Atlanta Hawks were the big winner there. Now, on Monday is when the Combine began. It began with all those testing where we find out just how tall everybody really is, what their wingspan is, the vertical leap, how quick they are laterally with the shuttle run. They do the sprints, some shooting drills, and some 4-on-4 action. This year was different because everybody was required to participate in that, which is vastly different than what's happened in years prior. Now, on Tuesday, you had the 5-on-5 action begin, and that's when a lot of the top prospects began to opt out. But still, you saw a number of players this year in contention for first-round spots who opted to play. We've had that for the last 2 days, yesterday and today. In fact, we are coming to you live today just after the second of 2 games wrapped up. The week here will conclude the next 2 days with pro day style events run by certain agencies. So on the court behind me, you see with those the drapes up behind me, that's because they are changing the facility over to begin with those pro days where different agencies will come in and work out their players in 30 or 60-minute increments in front of NBA executives. And this event is not open to the public. The only thing you have here is you have NBA executives, you have national media, and you have the family and friends of the participating players. Want to talk about briefly what we have seen in this gameplay, because we're going to talk about who played well and who didn't. But here's the most important thing. Is you follow this event online and you're following the action about who played well and who didn't, it's really important to keep in mind what this means and what it doesn't mean. For these 30 NBA front offices that are here, they have already done their due diligence on all of these players. They've scouted them extensively. So you're not finding anything here that's going to really change their mind. The best case scenario is maybe you get a thread that a scout can pull to show them a little something different in a prospect's game that they didn't get to see during the course of a season. So keep that in mind as we talk about some of the players that played well. Before we do that, we've got to talk about certainly the player who has the most attention from general fans who follow the game, and that is Bronny James. Now, Bronny James is here. He has made it clear he intends to go through the draft process. On Monday, he went through the various combine activities, from the shooting to the athletic testing. He scored really well athletically. He made shots, 2 things that were not a surprise. The other thing that candidly wasn't a surprise were the measurements. We've seen him listed at 6'3", 6'4" throughout the course of his high school and college career, but was never officially measured in any high school setting, at least not one that became public like is often the case at USA Basketball or some of these bigger national camps. But he measured 6'1.5", 210 pounds, and again, tested really well athletically, though, showing off that vertical leap. Now, when it came to the gameplay, on Tuesday, the opening game, he struggled. Didn't necessarily get into a great rhythm. Had a nice floater that is trending on social media, but only had 4 points. Now, today it was a different story. He got into a much better rhythm and showed a lot of the same things that we've seen over the years that we thought would make him able to impact winning. First and foremost, he was able to make spot-up shots. Secondly, he was able to offer some secondary playmaking when the ball got reversed. That means, no, he wasn't the point guard, he wasn't the primary initiator, but whether it was in dribble handoff action or a second side pick and roll, he was able to get in the lane and make a play. And then third, he was able to do it on the defensive end of the floor. And we know he is an unselfish player and a ball mover. And that's very much the prototype since high school that we've expected him to have some success with. The other thing I should mention about Bronny, he did speak to the media yesterday. On Tuesday, he made it very clear that he wanted to be judged apart from his father and his father's legacy, really out here to make his own name for himself. But I got to tell you, it was an impressive media session for someone who has very rarely spoken to the media over the years. He seemed poised, he seemed at ease with himself, and just gave some very, I thought, real answers You can check out Kyle Boone from CBS Sports. He's got some of that footage. But that was certainly a plus that we saw from Bronny this week. All right, when it comes to the players who have played well, we've got a number of guys that have really done well. First player I want to talk about in the game portions is KJ Simpson from Colorado. Now, this is a aggressive attacking guard who has really seized the moment here. Now, in Colorado, this was a guy who was often the alpha. He was the primary playmaker who would go and make plays, and he brought that same mentality with him here to Chicago. Again, there's a lot of players looking to distinguish themselves in this setting, but he was the player, particularly on Tuesday, that was able to do that. 16 points on day one. And day two, he came back and he finished with 11, 4, and 7. So he mixed it up a little bit in his on-court performance, showing his ability to get others involved and also getting off the glass, which is something we saw at Colorado. The downside for Simpson only measured 6 feet when you take a look at those official combine statistics. So that is going to be a question mark for NBA executives, is how does his size translate? I will offer this, though. We're at a point in time in NBA history where we have more undersized guards than ever, carving out successful careers for themselves in the league. So that is certainly a bonus for KJ Simpson. But again, in terms of the gameplay, he is really someone who has stood out. Another player who stood out on day one in particular was Baylor Shireman. Now, Baylor Shireman is a great example of a player who might not have played at this event in years past because he's considered a fringe first-round pick, very solidly in the second-round conversation. But when you were competing for a first-round spot, that means you were competing for guaranteed money. The interesting thing about Shireman is that his NBA role could be vastly different than what we saw at Creighton when he was really a primary connector. He didn't shoot the three as well today on Wednesday, but I don't think there's any doubts about his shooting. And what has really stood out is his decision-making, overall feel for the game, after the defense has already been broken down. So again, at Creighton, he's the primary creator. He's the first domino in their offense. In the NBA, though, he's going to be a floor spacer. He's going to be someone who makes open shots, who creates room for others to operate. And then once the offense is in advantage situations, who understands how to make quick, appropriate reads. And that is something that has really stood out in this setting. So I think Baylor Shireman has really helped himself so far here in Chicago. Another player to talk about, Zach Edey. All right, now this is an interesting one. Zach has not taken part in the 5-on-5 action, but as we said, everyone participated in the testing on Monday, and he really, I think, helped himself in that setting. This guy measured in at 7'5" with shoes on. That is absolutely massive. He also has a 7'11" wingspan, and get this, a 9 foot 7.5" standing reach. So that means flat-footed, this guy can go basically on his toes and touch the rim. He is absolutely huge, and the numbers backed it up here this weekend. The other thing I would say, there's a lot of talk about how his gait looked when he was running the floor in those sprinting drills, but in terms of his mobility, he exceeded expectations, even being better than Donovan Clingan in a couple areas, and I will say that has been a talking point here in Chicago. So Zach Edey, although he has not played 5-on-5, is someone who I think has helped himself here so far at the Combine. All right, another player who's helped himself so far, one of the stars of college basketball like Edey, is Jamal Shead from Houston. Now, if you recall, Shead went down with that ankle injury late in the season. That also limited some of his preparation coming in for this pre-draft process, but the heart and the will that made him one of the best and most tenacious guards in college basketball this season has carried through and is apparent in this setting. Now, he's a little undersized, but what NBA scouts love about him is just that bulldog mentality. You've been hearing a lot about the Jose Alvarado comparisons here this week because Shead is an elite on-ball defender. The thing he does not get enough credit for, quite frankly, is how smart of a player he is. When you start diving into the due diligence for Houston, you hear so many stories about his ability to understand what to run, to understand the schemes, to know exactly what the opposing team was trying to do. And that overall basketball IQ and leadership has come through in this setting as well. It's something that's been apparent. The key variable for Shead, can't do anything about his height, but teams want to see how well he shoots the basketball. And in particular, they are paying attention to his mechanics. And believe it or not, they're focused on these very nuanced type of things on his follow-through. There's been some talk about whether or not he finishes the shot like he did earlier in the season or if he's short-arming the shot. So those are some of the details that are being explored here this week. But Jamal Shead, another player who has really helped himself so far here in Houston. Let's keep this list going. I'm going to go back someone who has not played in 5-on-5 action, but who helped themselves on Monday. And again, Monday was the part of the week that was dedicated entirely to the testing, and it escalated up to some 4-on-4 action. But the player who helped himself there was Devin Carter from Providence College. Devin Carter, widely considered to be one of the most competitive players in this draft. But on Monday, he proved that he is also one of the most explosive athletes in this draft. 42-inch max vertical, which is tied for number one, 35-inch standing vertical, and then he tied a combine record for the best overall sprint time. So again, this is someone who came in with a reputation of being an alpha competitor, having all the tools to project into a big-time defender, and now he has the metrics to back up that he has the athleticism to do just that. We saw what he could do offensively this year at Providence. It is not expected that he's going to play that type of alpha role at the NBA level, but in terms of his ability to fill a secondary role player type position, really helped himself on Monday, and this is a prospect now that could be flirting with the lottery. But when it comes to players who help themselves with the athletic testing, I don't think anyone did more than Reed Sheppard. Now, let's look back and talk about Reed Sheppard. Obviously, he was the most pleasant surprise in all of college basketball this year, especially in the freshman class. But for as good as he was with the defensive metrics for the shooting, one thing that I don't think anybody was expecting was for this guy to come into Chicago and set the highest mark here with a 42-inch max vertical leap. That's right, Reed Sheppard is the best leaper in this year's NBA draft combine. Now, I want you to think about what that could do for his NBA stock. You can't take that number you have to consider the context, because this is a drill in which the speed of the jump is not considered. Basically, you have all the time you want to load up. You're not amongst bodies, so it's not totally translatable to an NBA game. But nonetheless, this was a statement type number for Reed Sheppard, and the latest data point that he can use as he potentially continues to climb up this draft board. So he is certainly a winner here in Chicago. And again, not surprisingly, the jumper looked very good in those shooting drills on Monday as well. Reed Sheppard, definitely one of the biggest winners here. Want to talk about a mid-major player who has helped themselves here in Chicago, and that is San Francisco's Jonathan Magbo. Now, only measured 6'6.5", so a little undersized, but if you watched him this year at San Francisco, you know this guy is a double-double machine, just an absolute warrior and tremendous on the glass. What has been interesting about him in this setting is that he showed some expanded ball skills here. He's been able to take the ball off the defensive glass and start the break. They even let him run a pick and roll on Tuesday. And then the physicality has continued to pop in this setting. He may be 6'6.5" without shoes on, but he measured with a plus 6.5 foot wingspan. That is absolutely massive. And on top of that, he's got a 9 foot plus standing reach. So a little undersized for a 4, maybe even an undersized 5-man, but certainly has the length to compensate. And he's showing more ball skills than maybe we knew we had. So it's going to be a really interesting decision. Does he go back to San Francisco and try and play his way into the first round next year? Or does he take advantage of what certainly seems like a chance to get taken in the second round, a chance to earn a two-way contract? That is going to be a very interesting decision with ramifications that will be felt in mid-major basketball next year. I'd say the biggest standout today on Wednesday, the second day of the games, I'm going to go with Adem Bona from UCLA. He was not necessarily the leading scorer, but his length and athleticism, they really came through in this setting. He scored in double figures, but more than that, he was an emphatic finisher. He blocked shots, and he flew in to rebound the ball outside his area with 2 hands. So the reason why that's important is because that's the role he's going to play at the NBA level. You see a lot of guys approaching the combine playing the game they did in college, but that doesn't necessarily translate. For Bona, what he did at the combine does translate to the NBA level. Run, finish, block shots, rebound. He's showing the power to be able to guard 5 men, even though he's a little undersized for that position. But definitely a good day for Adem Bona, another guy who's fighting for a guaranteed contract in next month's draft. All right, that was a quick look at some of the standouts here. Don't go anywhere, as we're going to continue to talk about some of the pending stay or go decisions. For more NBA draft coverage, please make sure to visit cbssports.com. I've been here. Kyle Boone has been here all week long. Isaac Trotter has been here all week long, and the coverage is nonstop over there. cbssports.com for the latest leading up to the draft on June 26th and 27th, because remember, this is a 2-day affair for the first time in NBA draft history this year, at least in recent draft history. All right, now, for college basketball fans, why is the draft combine relevant? Well, it's relevant because this is the last temperature check, if you will, for players who are thinking about whether to go back to college or head to the NBA. Now, this is a decision that is always, or quite often, rooted in economics, meaning what is the earning potential in college and what is the earning potential in the NBA? For years, that has never been a close comparison. For kids who were in a situation that they or their families needed to make money right away, they had to go to the NBA. That is no longer the case anymore. In fact, I will tell you that the recent NIL news, specifically with Great Osborne and his reported $2 million deal at Washington, has been a frequent point of conversation here in Chicago, both among the NBA executives, the players as well, and specifically the players who are mulling the opportunity to go back to college. The two-way contract in the NBA is slightly over $500,000 a year. Now, obviously, that is huge money, but two-way contracts are not guaranteed, which means you could get cut at any point in the season. With more and more NIL deals now being papered, being contractually binding, there's an opportunity to not only make more money by going back to college, but to have it be guaranteed money on top of that. And that is changing the decision-making process for a lot of these kids. So let's talk about some of the more notable players that have big decisions to make. Number one, from the defending national champions, Alex Karaban. Now, Alex Karaban came into this event looking to play his way into the first round. He's reportedly already had some workouts and in consideration for teams at the end of the first round. He has been a monster of efficiency for UConn throughout the last 2 years. Came out, had a really good day to start, made 14 threes in a row in Monday's drill session. Tuesday, did not have the performance he was looking for, but he rebounded with a strong game here today in game 2 on Wednesday. Now, here's the decision-making process for Karaban. He measured in at 6'6.5". Obviously, another year is not going to do that, but I do think there's an opportunity to go back to UConn, become the focal point, and diversify his attack. I think NBA scouts really love his versatility. They love his processing ability. They love the passing and the floor spacing. The positional size is a little bit of a question mark. His decision is going to be a really interesting one. He has said that he is focused on the draft process, but he is, and I quote, in a win-win situation. At the end of the day, I think this is a player who has an opportunity to not only compete for a spot in the first round by going back to school, but let's think about this, has a chance to solidify maybe the best career in UConn history. He's 2 for 2 in terms of national championships in years at UConn. Dan Hurley's talked about going for the three-peat. That's a lot harder than it sounds. But Alex Karaban, if he were to go back, he could really solidify himself as he already is one of the all-time greats, but really, would anyone have a better career in UConn history? So that is certainly a very tantalizing consideration for him. He is at the top of boards in terms of the most interesting stories because he is right on the brink, has a chance to go in that first round, but could slip to the second as well. Now let's talk about some of the other players who are contemplating going back to school, but who are also in the transfer portal. This is where it gets really interesting. The player who is in the news today, Ugonna Onyenso, who was at Kentucky last year, we've talked about him in the past. He's not in 5-on-5 action here at the Combine, but again, he was in the news because it was reported that he cut his list down to 3 or 5. Then he came out, or his coaches, representatives came out and said that is not true. Here's what we know for sure. The big fella declared for the draft in what most people thought might be a little premature. It does now seem that his earning potential is going to be much, much higher in college basketball. And given that the portal is closed, he has a wealth of options, no pun intended. North Carolina still needs a big. They are trying to replace Armando Bacot. They have not been able to do so yet. They are considered among his top options. Another program that is considered among his biggest options is Louisville. We've seen Pat Kelsey make some notable additions, 2 in fact today, including Connie Ruth, the former Michigan commit out of the high school ranks. He too needs a rim protector. Alabama was considered in the mix, given that they've already got Cliff Amore. I'm not sure that's an option anymore, but keep an eye on North Carolina and Louisville for Ugonna as time continues to go on here, and we'll be on the lookout there. You can follow 247sports.com for all that. A player who did really well here today, Coleman Hawkins. Now, this was one of those interesting cases where we knew he was declaring for the draft, 4th-year senior this year at Illinois, but he put his name in the portal on the last day allowed. That gives him the opportunity to play out this draft process, but then also cash in on the current NIL numbers if it turns out that the NBA doesn't give him the type of guarantee he's looking for. I'll tell you this much. He spoke to our Isaac Trotter this week. You can read about that at 247sports.com. He said he's 90% in the draft. His 17-point performance today had to have only further pushed that number. But I believe this is a player whose earning potential would be higher by going back to college. We've talked about the market drying up, lack of quality big men available. This is someone who is skilled. He can not only shoot the ball, he can pass the ball as he showed it today. He has terrific size to match. Going to be a very interesting case study because he too is back in the portal. And he said he's not playing in the Big Ten. So if he goes back to college basketball, presumably it will be at a new location. So he is someone that schools are here, I would say, even actively recruiting. They're here to see a lot of college coaches here to watch their own players. But with Coleman Hawkins, they are here to see if there's a possibility that they can lure him away from his 90% path towards the NBA, because he would be as good of a player as is left in the portal right now. Another player in that situation, Washington State's Jalen Wells. This is what I will say about Jalen Wells. I think Jalen Wells is the best player in the portal that we are not talking enough about. We are talking about someone who started their career at the Division II level, went to Washington State last year, a little bit under the radar, and then exceeded all expectations, declared for the draft. And now, I'll tell you what, he's got a little bit of buzz with NBA executives. Went for 13 points today. People love his overlap of positional size and shooting. Interested to see if there's any playmaking that come for that. He's not expected to go back to Washington State because Kyle Smith took the job at Stanford. He's also not expected to follow Smith to Stanford because of the admission criteria there as a one-year senior. So this is someone else who, if he decides not to follow through on this NBA draft process, would go into the market as a wide open free agent, so to speak, and really not only command top dollar, but be, I think, one of the more valued players in the portal that we are not talking a lot about. I will tell you this, the perception of Jalen Wells among NBA executives and college coaches is much higher than I think the general discourse among college basketball fans are. The NBA executives and college coaches have a very high opinion of this man and are very interested to see if he can make yet another step next year, given the progression that he's shown, not just last year at Washington State, not just in the 2 years prior to that at the Division II level, but you go back into his high school dates, and we've got a late bloomer who got notably better with each passing year and has continued to do so. So keep an eye on him as well. All right, everybody, that is it here from Chicago. We will be back tomorrow. Going to have pro day workouts here for the agencies. You can follow all that action, 247sports.com, as well as CBS Sports Online. We've got wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates, everything you could possibly want to know about this NBA draft process, as well as the implications on college basketball, 247sports.com. We will see you again on the show next week.